Hi, I'm Ben, a developer advocate here at Adapty, and I'm here to take you through the iOS SDK 3.3.0 migration guide. We've made some changes to our code, and we'd like to show you what changes you need to make in your code to stay up to date. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at either the app main file or the app delegate, depending on which one you're using, whether you're using a SwiftUI app or an app UIKit app. The change is the same, however. Once you find that, you're going to go in here to the Adapty configuration builder that you're creating to initialize the Adapty SDK. And you're going to change adapty.configuration to simply Adapty configuration. Just take the period out. We've changed the name of the class that we're using to simply Adapty configuration. In addition, you want to change the builder call from a capital B to a lowercase b. Change it to just a standard method name. And so we want to change that to a lowercase b. By making those changes, you should be all set on Adapty configuration for 3.3.0. The next change you're going to make is in anywhere you're using a view configuration object. We changed this to be get paywall configuration rather than get view configuration. So if you're using that method, you want to change the name to get paywall configuration. And then we're going to update the names of these variables just simply to match so they're consistent. So rather than being view config objects, they are paywall config objects. So we'll just change those where they need to be. Additionally, we're storing this local paywall configuration object as a property at the top of our type. So we're going to scroll up here where it says view config, and we're going to change this to, again, match the name, paywall config. And then the change here is it's no longer storing a localized view configuration object. Now it's storing a paywall configuration object, which is off of the Adapty UI. So it's still an optional because you're only going to get it if you go fetch that information, but we're changing that to paywall configuration. In our call to presenting the actual paywall itself using the .paywall call, which takes a whole bunch of arguments to set up and configure the paywall and then handle the response that we get from the user, whether they are continuing and purchasing or canceling or it failed for some reason. All of those different kinds of outcomes are handled within this paywall call. And there have been a few changes made here as well for 3.3.0. So one is that we're going to simply remove the paywall as an inclusion in the argument list. We're not going to be passing the paywall anymore. So go ahead and remove that. And then here, rather than passing in the view config, we're going to pass in the paywall config. So we change the name of the parameter and then change the argument itself over to the paywall config property. Now we're passing in the paywall config. The paywall config actually contains the paywall itself, which is why we don't have to pass the paywall object separately. It's all contained within that one object. Additionally, we're no longer using the did cancel purchase call in the argument in the paywall. Instead, we are using did finish purchase for everything. So if you don't have a did finish purchase, you want to use that. It's going to pass in a product object and also a purchase result. And then you have the opportunity here to handle that result, whether it be successful or cancellation by the user, an error of some kind, whatever that may be. You can handle that result here. And you then want to get rid of the did cancel purchase parameter that you may have been passing into the paywall beforehand. The next change we're going to look at is in the Adapty delegate. So if you're using the Adapty delegate and you are perhaps deferring purchases to a later time, you're intercepting purchases that come in outside of the context of the app itself, and you want to handle them, perhaps defer them or cancel them, there have been one small change to that as well. So you can see here, and again, the example application, we have the should add store payment for product function that comes in as part of the Adapty delegate, returns a Boolean. And your options here are to either return true if you want to continue the transaction inside the app immediately, or you can save that deferred product object that gets passed in as an argument into a property and then use it later to, again, so you're deferring or perhaps canceling that product at a later time. In that case, you want to pass false out of the function. And then here you can see in the continue deferred purchase method, we change this from taking completion handler to being asynchronous. So that's the change you're going to want to make if you're using this, is make this async. And then we're going to, in this case, grab the deferred product if it exists and go ahead and make the purchase using the async method for that as well. And of course, catching and handling any errors that might occur. But the change here is really going to be changing the completion handler over to async. The next thing you'll want to analyze is the get products introductory offer eligibility method. Before the current version, we required you to check the offers that were provided within this to make sure that the user was eligible. We provided all the offers no matter what the eligibility status was. in iOS 3.3.0 of the SDK, we now only provide the offers if the user is eligible. So you no longer have to perform any of that checking logic. And if you have that logic in your code, you can remove it. If you want to check the offers that are available, even if they aren't eligible per that user, you can refer to the SK1 product or SK2 product properties, depending on whether you're using which version of StoreKit you're using. The next change is related to our third-party integrations for the attribution SDKs. So before the current version, we accepted an any hashable any dictionary, which allows you to simply directly pass the attribution objects in from whatever tool you were using into Adapty's SDK, and it would accept it. With 3.3.0, we're now requiring a string key and an any sendable object. So you will need to make some modifications to your attribution code in order to pass the data in the correct format. In the 3.3.0 migration guide on Adapty's website, you'll see that we have code examples for all of the integrations that we support. So adjust, airbridge, amplitude, etc. You simply need to go to that section that's relevant for you and take a look at the code block. The code block in red is what gets removed, and the code block in green is what gets added. In some cases, it's actually being added. In some cases, it's just a modification of the current code. So take a look at that and make the adjustments accordingly. And the last change is related to the observer mode implementation. So if you're using observer mode with Adapty, you want to pay attention to this last part. In the old version of the SDK, we asked you to set the variation ID on a transaction by calling set variation ID and passing in a variation ID object and a transaction object, and you would get back a closure where you could handle any errors. In the new version, we now have a report transaction asynchronous method call that you pass in the transaction and the variation ID, and that's how those two objects are related in the system. Be sure to make this change and do this if you're using observer mode, because if you do not, you won't recognize the transaction. You will not be able to grant access levels to your users, unlock the functionality that they've paid for. You will not have this transaction reported in your analytics, and it won't be sent to your integrations. So it's effectively like this transaction never happened if you don't call report transaction. So make sure you do so. That's going to be it for me. You have a full migration guide available to you for the 3.3.0 migration at adapty.io/docs. Please be sure to check it out, and happy coding.